The Spanish-American War of 1898 was exactly that, a conflict of epic proportions between two great powers, the United States and Spain. The outcome of this battle would mark the end of Spanish colonial rule in the Americas and bring about the birth of new territories in the Western Pacific and Latin America under American authority. It was a turning point in history, a moment that would forever change the balance of power in the world. Origins of the war. The Spanish-American War began in 1898 due to Cuba's fight for independence from Spain. The war had a negative impact on American investments in Cuba, which were worth $50 million, and almost ended American trade with Cuban ports, usually valued at $100 million annually. The conflict led to the destruction of sugarcane and sugar mills, but the more significant issue was the treatment of Cubans under the Spanish commander, Captain General Valeriano Weyler y Nicolau. Cubans were forced into reconcentration areas, and those who remained at large were treated as enemies without adequate provisions for shelter, food, sanitation, or medical care. The U.S. media portrayed these conditions, and the American public's humanitarian concerns grew as they sympathized with the Cuban struggle for independence. Despite popular demand for action, the U.S. faced challenges of preventing gun running to the insurgents and demands for aid from Cubans who had acquired U.S. citizenship and were arrested by Spanish authorities for participating in the rebellion. The U.S. Congress supported the demand for intervention to stop the war and ensure Cuban independence. In the spring of 1896, the Senate and the House of Representatives passed a concurrent resolution declaring that the insurgents should be granted belligerent rights. However, President Grover Cleveland opposed intervention and did not act on this congressional opinion. Cleveland suggested that the prolongation of the war might make intervention necessary in his final message to Congress. President William McKinley also wanted to maintain peace with Spain but made it clear in his first instructions to the new minister to Spain, Stuart L. Woodford, and in his first message to Congress that the U.S. could not stand aside and watch the violent conflict continue indefinitely. The Spanish government's concessions to the Cuban insurgents came too late, and the war continued. In February 1898, the sinking of the U.S. battleship Maine heightened tensions between the two nations. Although the cause of the explosion was unknown, the U.S. public blamed Spain, and the slogan, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," became popular. U.S. President McKinley sent an ultimatum to Spain, demanding that it abandon reconcentration, declare an armistice, and accept U.S. mediation in peace negotiations with the insurgents. Spain's acceptance of these terms was complicated by the fact that it had not readied its army or navy for war with the United States, nor had it warned the Spanish public of the necessity of relinquishing Cuba. In response to McKinley's ultimatum, Spain agreed to end the reconcentration policy and announced an armistice on its own initiative but refused to concede independence, which McKinley considered necessary for peace and order in Cuba. Congress declared on April 20 that the people of Cuba are, and of right ought to be, free and independent, and authorized the President to use the Army and Navy of the United States to enforce that demand. The President beat back an attempt in the Senate to include recognition of the existing but insubstantial Cuban Republic. The Spanish government could not agree to the U.S.'s demands, and the Spanish-American War began on April 25, 1898. Fighting in the Philippines and Cuba. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was one-sided. Spain was not prepared for war with a powerful United States. The United States had superior sea power with 4 new battleships and protected cruisers. Theodore Roosevelt's enthusiasm and energy helped the U.S. ships to engage in battle maneuvers, target practice, and get fuel and ammunition. The U.S. Navy destroyed the anchored Spanish ships in Manila Bay with naval gunfire on May 1, 1898. They took possession of the city of Manila on August 13, 1898. Meanwhile, the U.S. objective in Cuba was to trap the Spanish fleet between the Army and Navy. The Rough Riders Regiment played a significant role in the battles of El Caney and San Juan Hill. The U.S. forces penetrated the outer defenses of Santiago, and all of the Spanish ships were beached or sunk. On July 3, 1898, the Spanish fleet tried to escape but was defeated by the U.S. fleet. Santiago surrendered to the U.S. forces 2 weeks later. The peace process. The Spanish government asked France to help end the war with America, which was officially over when an agreement was signed on August 12, 1898. Spain agreed to give up authority over Cuba and cede Puerto Rico and an island in the Mariana Islands to the U.S., while the U.S. occupied Manila in the Philippines until a peace treaty was signed. McKinley and his advisors debated what to do with the Philippines, as they had not planned on acquiring them. However, Dewey's victory in Manila Bay made many people see the strategic importance of the Philippines. Despite difficulties in returning the islands to Spanish rule or granting self-government, McKinley decided to take possession of the Philippines. The U.S. paid Spain $20 million for public buildings and works, and the Treaty of Paris was signed, giving the U.S. control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The treaty faced strong opposition in the U.S. Senate but was approved. The Philippine-American War began 2 days before the treaty was approved, with Aguinaldo's insurgents fighting U.S. troops. The Filipinos carried out guerrilla warfare against U.S. rule for 3 years, with 20,000 Filipino troops and 200,000 civilians dead, and an estimated 4,300 Americans perishing mostly from disease. Consequences of the war. The Spanish-American War had significant consequences for both Spain and the United States. Spain suffered immediate losses, but it marked a Renaissance period that spanned over 2 decades in agriculture, mineral resources, industry, and transportation. A group of thinkers and writers known as the Generation of 1898 also emerged and gave Spain an intellectual and literary prominence in Europe that it had not enjoyed for centuries. For the United States, the war marked a turning point as it emerged as a world power with insular possessions in the Caribbean and across the Pacific, including Hawaii. Although economic motives played a little part in the war, they influenced the peace settlement. The war stimulated enthusiasm for the U.S. Navy, which grew to become the world's second-largest war fleet. It also advanced the career of the country's first world-minded president, Theodore Roosevelt. Within a few years of the war's conclusion, the United States had made the Caribbean its own, was taking a leading role in the politics of the Far East, and was preparing to play a significant role in the affairs of Europe.